there is a certain spirit to driving a Rolls-Royce that I think rivals that of being a passenger in a Rolls-Royce.
This car's been on fire twice. It's been crashed. This particular car, this exact car, was the hero car in the AMC series Nosferatu.
There's nothing quite as satisfying as wafting along in a vintage Rolls-Royce, except perhaps being a subscriber to the Audrain Museum Network. You can enjoy the quality that you find in a Rolls-Royce motor car in every video on this network. So subscribe now, hit that button, and join us here in the Audrain Museum Network. Thanks. 1939 was a very interesting time for cars, and especially in the UK. The threat of war had been increasing steadily since 1938, and no one really knew what was going to happen. In addition to which, of course, the Depression was still very much in evidence. There had been some signs of recovery, but again, with the doubt of war, it became very difficult to maintain things in an economic sphere with so much uncertainty. Now, as we know, in Detroit, the cylinder wars had developed in the 1930s, with all of the luxury manufacturers seeking to get as much of an advantage as they could in the rapidly declining prestige market. And yet also some, like Packard and even Cadillac with the LaSalle, sought to cover their bases by offering a more middle-class offering. Well, no one ever accused Rolls-Royce of making a middle-class offering, but yet there were a range of models that Rolls-Royce offered from the 1920s onward that did actually reflect two different market segments. And the car that I'm driving today is a 1939 Rolls-Royce Wraith, not to be confused with the post-war Silver Wraith. But this is a model that was developed from the, I hesitate to say lower line Rolls-Royce, but the lower line Rolls-Royce, the 2025, which I think frankly has been much maligned in the marketplace and by collectors as being sort of slow and ponderous and not very important. This development of the car, the 4200cc engine, an F-head engine, was really designed to offer, for those people who wanted Rolls-Royce quality, a car that didn't have the cost of a Phantom. Of course, at this point, the Phantom 2 had been replaced by the Phantom 3, Rolls-Royce's first 12-cylinder car, and so therefore it occupied a much higher market niche than the Phantom 2 had. But quite interestingly, given the times, and against what you would probably expect, they made in a 2-year production run of the Wraith just about 490 of these chassis to be sent to coach builders for bodying and delivery to customers, against 700 of the Phantom 3, the big 12-cylinder. So clearly the key market for Rolls-Royce was still the upper end. But nonetheless, this is a car that I think is absolutely fascinating, because I've long been fascinated by the 2025s. There's some absolutely beautiful coachwork in 2025 chassis, and the cars are not particularly slow. They're not sparkling performers, but with the right coachwork that isn't too heavy, they can be quite enjoyable to drive. This is a town car limousine, and the bodywork is not particularly sporting, but it is remarkably comfortable for the chauffeur, with this body style, it's not an owner-driver car, but it is amazing to think about the difference that a Rolls-Royce Chauffeur had over some others that had to drive some of the other European marques, for instance, whether it be Hispano Suiza or Minerva or cars like that, where the driving experience itself is not that entertaining. This car is very easy to drive even today in 2024. And at the time it had some really advanced features that really set it apart and were very much in the idiom of Rolls-Royce quality and sophistication. In 1938, the Wraith featured variable rate shocks controlled by a governor. It had built-in hydraulic jacking and power-assisted steering, all of which again is very advanced and makes this a very pleasurable driving experience for the chauffeur. And the variable rate shocks would also make it very comfortable for the passengers. Now on this example, which was donated by a great friend of the Audrain, a fellow named Ben Taradash, with whom we'll be speaking a little later, also has a bit of a movie history. The movie history of this car is not quite like that of the Isotta Fraschini driven by Erich von Stroheim in Sunset Boulevard, or the Porsche 911 driven in Le Mans by Steve McQueen, or even the Nash Healey driven in Sabrina. But nonetheless, it's very interesting, and it speaks a lot to what cars can do in terms of enhancing character. And just to go back to that for a moment, even though the post-war car called the Silver Wraith was not a close relative of this car, it was sort of, this car was the inspiration for that Wraith, in that it really fulfilled that ultimate thought and fantasy of what we think of today as a classic Rolls-Royce. It's very proper, it's very upright, it is got a great presence, and yet is not at all showy. It seems a strange thing to say, that a Rolls-Royce is not showy, but this Rolls-Royce just has such a quiet confidence about it. I guess that's the way to best to put it. This Park Ward coachwork is, it reminds me of a banker or a solicitor or a company vice chairman going to work in the city with his morning suit and bowler hat. But a banker with a sense of humor, that particularly dry, particularly English sense of humor. It's very, very formal. You can just sense a bit of a smile behind the seriousness. And that's what this car reminds me of. It's very simple, it's very elemental in its lines, but there's just a bit of flair. Not too much to alarm the neighbors, but just so that they know that you're not stodgy, you're not old-fashioned. You're someone who's with the times. And I have to say that, given my already professed affection for the 2025, driving this Wraith makes me think, perhaps there might be a 2025, or if I could find a really interestingly bodied Wraith, might be an interesting option. The ambiance in here reminds me very much of my 1953 Jaguar Mark 7. There's nothing like that English club ambiance that exists in these cars, but my Jaguar has a bit more performance to go with it. But this sort of seems like the actual way to experience this. Added to the luxury and comfort conveniences of this Wraith are dashboard mounted controls for raising and lowering the division as well as the shade to provide privacy for the passengers in the rear. The fact that this car also provides an amazingly smooth ride so many years after it was built is a testament to both Rolls-Royce, who built the chassis, and to Park Ward, who built this body. You really can feel the presence of quality in this car, quality and ease. And I think that that's something that really set Rolls-Royce apart in the marketplace back then, and something that they've striven to maintain to this day. There is a certain spirit to driving a Rolls-Royce that I think rivals that of being a passenger in a Rolls-Royce. You can just see as we pass by this beautiful farm, we're driving through the British farmland to go to the country estate of the original owner of this Wraith. It feels very much at home here on these roads and in 2024. This is a wonderful spirit. Thank you very much, Mr. Taradash, for your wonderful donation to the Audrain. As I mentioned when I was driving this wonderful Rolls-Royce, that it was donated by the great Audrain friend, Ben Taradash. And I also mentioned a thing about movie history. And Ben, you've got a particular connection with this car and movies and your life in general. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you're absolutely right. It does have a little bit of film history. This is, I'm a motion picture car coordinator, and this particular car, this exact car, was the hero car in the AMC series Nosferatu. So for 2 seasons, we filmed this whole show in Rhode Island. It was a completely Rhode Island-based event. We had wonderful sets, and we had a wonderful crew, all local, all done right here, and this car was one of the lead characters.
Now, what was the role of this car in the series for those people who have not seen Nosferatu? And of course, you've got to all now look it up and watch this car.
Well, the Wraith, Nosferatu was written by Stephen King's son, whose name is Joe Hill, whose pen name is Joe Hill. And it's very similar to the Christine theme, where the car was an evil character and would basically go around eating children in order to extend the life of the driver.
Understand that that was just in the series. You can visit the Audrain and see this car if it's there on display or at one of our events and have no fear.
It will not eat your children.
Exactly.
It was, I mean, it was really quite something. This car, we had, so this is WXA61. We also,
our chassis number.
Yep, that's the chassis number. If Rolls people always refer to them by their chassis numbers, it's almost like their name.
Rolls people and Ferrari people, it's a thing.
Yeah, WXA61, of course. So this is the 1939 Rolls-Royce by Park Ward, called the 2025. No, I'm sorry, the 2530. So 25 to 30 horsepower. They weren't exactly sure how much horsepower it was, so they just said, we'll give it a broad reach of 5, give or take. It's about in that ballpark.
Depending on your tax guy.
Exactly.
Consult a tax professional.
Perfect. This was, when we got this car, it was bright yellow and black. And when I say yellow,
not the most flattering colors for a car like this or a beautiful body like this.
It does look quite villainous in black. I always thought it would look good with a blood red pinstripes. That way it looked like it was consuming people. But yeah, this car was brought into Canada in the early 2000s. The production company, which was called Stalwart Productions, based in North Kingston, Rhode Island, they purchased the car, and I was on another movie at the time when this show started, so I advised them for a couple of weeks, and then I came on to full-time position as the picture car coordinator, and this car very quickly became my whole life. This car's been on fire twice. It's been crashed twice. It's been rolled over. We had, like I said, we had one backup Rolls, which was WXA 27, which was the 38. And we had a stunt Wraith, which was a Park Ward body, but off a 2025.
Let me ask you a question about that, because a lot of people watching this wonder how movies are made, and you mentioned the fact this car's been on fire twice, it's been wrecked. You're looking at the car, clearly it's not smashed. it's not burned. So what do you actually do to make sure that when you're not dealing with a huge budget CG
Yes.
series or film?
Well, there's a lot of shows that don't want to do CG anymore. They'd rather just wreck them. Because CG with a crash never really looks right. So this 1939 Wraith was the villain in the show. And another vehicle that the museum also acquired recently is the hero of the show, which was a 1971 Triumph Bonneville. And this car hit the Bonneville at least 3 times. And what we would do is we'd
So
take...
the Bonneville is a motorcycle.
Yes. What we would do is we would take the bumper off. We even took the fenders off. I mean, this car's been apart more times than I care to mention. And we built a whole structure for the front of the car to absorb the impact with a clear Lexan shield, so that way when we hit the bike and the stunt person, you wouldn't see the barrier. And then they were on a cable rig, they'd fly off, and they'd fly out. And we had piles of cardboard boxes that are lime green for so you can green screen it. And the bike would land in the pile of cardboard boxes that were green, and that would be a soft landing. But
well, it is a tribute to your skills, the skills of your team, the fact that when I drove this car, there is not a squeak or a rattle, no matter how many times this car has been apart. I think that the fine folks at Park Ward would say, well done, Benjamin, well done. It's astonishing that when you were finished with this car, when it was finished with its evil movie duties, that it's come back together in a way that is really true to the way it was built, and the driving experience is so incredibly wonderful. It's something that I noticed in driving a lot of chauffeur cars, a lot of town cars and limousines of this period. Very frequently, they were designed completely with the passengers in mind.
Yes.
The chauffeur is very much an afterthought. Driving this and driving most Rolls-Royces of this period, not the case at all.
no, it's really a lovely car. I mean, it's a Rolls. It goes like the wind, only quieter. It's that was one of my big challenges in that show, and we had wonderful producers on that with Colin Walsh and Lucius Ramsey, who are all from Rhode Island. And the preservation of the asset, it's a preservation of the car. We couldn't destroy the car. I mean, that was one of the great many challenges, because when you're doing this, they want to be able to do. They don't understand. They're not car people, so they wanted this car. I remember the second day I was there, they said, "All right, we want to shoot a burnout scene with the Rolls-Royce where the tire just burns out for about 200 feet." And I said, "You have a better chance of talking to God than getting this car to do that, unless we are on an ice rink," which actually came up in discussion, because you have to get the scene. It doesn't matter whether or not the car will do it or not, you have to get it. So what we ended up doing with that particular scene was we have these wonderful spoke covers, these big dishes, and we were able to get a modern wheel, the same dimensions. We put this dish on it, and then it's the one shot of that wheel during the burnout is actually, I think it's a 1987 Mustang with custom-made wheels on it with these Rolls-Royce covers, and that's what does the burnout, because this car is clearly never going to do that. I'd like to think that the engineers that built this would simply be mortified at the concept of driving this car aggressively, which is unfathomable for a gentleman.
Absolutely. Secrets of the movie business, and what's wonderful about the story of the life of a car. It's what we celebrate at the Audrain. And Ben, once again, thank you very much for making this a part of our collection.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.